Fire.
Oh, great. It's not working for me today. So, hell makes you think of fire. You said torment.
Yes, sir.
And what are names that you can think of when you hear the word hell? What are other names that you can think of that you might associate with that?
Hades.
Yeah. Sheol.
Sheol. That is actually do it down here. Sheol. That is the Hebrew, practically the equivalent. These two are they have the same kind of meaning in the native language.
Bottomless pit.
Pit,
Yep. Chasm.
chasm.
Yeah.
How do you spell chasm?
CHASM.
Ah, CHAS, chasm. There you go. So, you know, like we talked about heaven, we have different ideas about heaven, but in some ways we kind of hesitate sometimes to bind our mind on what heaven looks like or whatever. But hell, we have more we have more vivid images of what hell is like. Partly because we take those images that make us not want to be there.
Mm-hmm.
But let's. I'm going to read some stuff from the study that I've been going through, and I mostly want to ask questions today. I don't want to try to teach as much as I want us together to learn. But so in the Old Testament, basically you don't really have an idea of hell in the sense of a place of punishment. You have Sheol, and Sheol is really more of a resting place. It is not resting, but it is a place for people who have gone through the grave, right? So Sheol is kind of what's beyond the grave. It's a waiting place, and the Old Testament doesn't really give an idea of Sheol being a place of praise or of torment. It doesn't talk about it being a place where it's good, but it's just basically it's where people are. Isaiah chapter 5 verse 14 mentions Sheol, and it says, "Therefore Sheol has enlarged its appetite and opened its mouth beyond measure, and the nobility of Jerusalem and her multitude will go down, her revelers and he who exults in her." So basically, Sheol is where people are going to go because it will consume them like death. And we'll get into some other descriptions of that. We're not going to spend much time in the Old Testament. Psalms chapter 6, verse 5 talks about how can anyone praise you, or how can, basically nothing is going to happen with respect to God, really, in Sheol. How can people praise you if they're dead, is kind of where they go. But so Sheol is basically waiting place for the dead. Okay, it's the place where they not rest, but where they stay.
So you mean once we die, we must go to Sheol first?
Well, I don't. Let's read through some more scripture and get an idea, because. Well, yeah, I don't want to. I don't either, which is why I don't want to lead this discussion, because I've come to some conclusions, but I don't know that I want to impress those too hardly on us as a group, that we can have this discussion. So anyway, so the Sheol is the Hebrew equivalent of the term that we're more familiar with in Hades. And so Hades, when we think of Greek mythology, we can kind of imagine what Sheol is more like, because Hades is not a place of specific. I mean, it's basically where people go, and then there's, I think, what is it, Tartarus? That is which is, or maybe that's just a different name for Hades. But basically, Hades is really just the place for the dead, as I understand it.
Okay. I always understood it kind of like when Jesus talked about paradise. If you go to paradise when you die, there's the good side and the bad side. Where Lazarus was with the good side in Abraham's bosom, but he was looking across the chasm at the bad side, where the rich man was hot and thirsty and wanted to drink water, and he couldn't get it across the chasm.
Heaven. Right, so Abraham's bosom being heaven. On the other side, you have the gentleman that's tormented. So this is why, I mean, we're not going to get specifically into that. And it's hard because, I mean, there's so much here. And I think part of, like we talked about with heaven, there's so much that we don't understand, can't probably even possibly understand. When Jesus talks to, Nicodemus, the Pharisee who comes to him by night and talks to him, and he talks about being born again, and Nicodemus is confused out of his mind. What are you talking about? How is this possible?
Yeah.
What does it mean? And Jesus is telling him things, and he says, how is it that you are this great teacher of Israel and you don't even understand this? And to us, that's kind of a simple teaching, right? Baptism and being reborn again, it's part of our inherited faith, and so it's not uncommon for us. It's not confusing for us over time. We've come to understand this. But I think heaven and hell are things that are probably further beyond our understanding than we imagine. And so a lot of what we hear is really more of to get you to understand what it is and what it's like, and why you want to be here and why you don't want to be there, and what the difference is between the two. And that's James's take. But let's go to Revelations chapter 6, verse 8, and we're going to read a couple of passages in Revelations just talking about, in Revelations is a book of imagery, a book of, there's some of it that's literal, and most of it is more figurative and trying to encourage and remind people about the victory. Revelation 6, verse 8. And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and its rider's name was Death, and Hades followed him. And they were given the authority over a fourth of the earth to kill with the sword, with famine and pestilence, and by wild beasts of the earth. So Hades is following right behind Death, and Hades being in a sense as a god, he's a character who is responsible for Hades itself. So you have this idea of death going through the earth and consuming people or killing people, and Hades is taking them. Okay? So death is going, and Hades takes them to his dwelling. All right, and then Revelations chapter 1, verse 17, going backwards. Go ahead.
I never thought about Hades being able to move, but that says, and Hades followed him.
Well, and it's just, I think it's just more of a figurative, because you're talking to people who probably are familiar with the Greek mythology and whatnot, and Hades is more than just a place, but also a god. And so the idea that Hades, the one responsible for that place, is right behind death. They're two distinct kind of entities, and that's not really to say that we don't believe in that, but that's just the imagery that I think is trying to be applied here. So let's go to Revelation chapter 1, verse 17. And it says, "When I saw him, I fell at his feet as though dead. He laid his right hand on me, saying, 'Fear not, I am the first and the last, the living one, and the living one. I died, and behold, I am alive forevermore. And I have the keys of death and Hades.'" So, number one, who is this that's talking?
Jesus.
Jesus is talking, because he is the first, the last. So he's the beginning and the end. He is the I am, and he is the one who died and is now living and will live forevermore. And he owns the keys to death and Hades. So what does that mean, that he owns the keys to death and Hades?
He can lock them up anytime he wants to.
Yeah,
Do away with them.
Jesus has power over.
Mm-hmm.
Over what goes in and what comes out. And that's specifically with reference to Hades in this passage. So Jesus has power over who goes in and who comes out of Hades. He owns that. Let's go to Revelation chapter 20, verse 12 through 15. If someone will read that. Revelation 20:12 through 15.
"And I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne, and books were opened. But another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged by what was written in the books, according to what they had done. And the sea gave up the dead who were in it. Death and Hades gave up the dead who were in them. And they were judged, each one of them, according to what they had done. Then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. This is the second death, the lake of fire. And if anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire."
So, when you read about, when we say the lake of fire, we can see this may be more defined later, but what is that specifically? Well, it says in the text, I think, which is most specific, the lake of fire is
The second
the
death.
second death. Okay, so I'm just gonna second death. So the lake of fire is the second death, and so what things are being thrown into this second death?
Death and Hades.
Death and Hades. Death. So death and Hades. So these are being thrown into the second death. Now, what does that imply about death and Hades?
I mean, if your name is not in the book of life, you will be thrown into Hades.
Right. So that right after this, that verse, the next one says, anyone who's not in the book of life is thrown in to the lake of fire. But death and Hades, what does that mean that they are thrown into the same place first?
Wow. Well, goodness, I'm not sure how to approach that. But
I don't know.
it seems like they are. Once you're in the lake of fire, you're there permanently. You're gone forever.
Right. And he says the lake of fire is the second death, and death is an end, and is destructive. It's the end of something, right?
Mm-hmm.
So death and Hades are thrown into that lake of fire, and in eternity, for those who are in the book of life, there is no more death. There's nothing awaiting us after death, because we've already, in a sense, we've already died our 2 times. We've died spiritually and been raised again, and then we've died physically. I mean, there's only 2 deaths for us to die.
Right.
One we can choose for ourselves, the other one we don't. But so death and Hades are thrown into the lake of fire and presumably destroyed. So they're understood to be destroyed. And then people are thrown into the lake of fire who are not in the book of life, who are also destroyed. Or at least that's what it seems like. So death is an end, as I understand it. So let's see, what else? Any other thoughts on that? I mean, this is some crazy stuff.
Is there anything that ties Satan to death and Hades?
Well, let's go further, and we'll see what I've pulled out, and see what we come to a conclusion of. I'm not sure how to answer that yet.
Mm-hmm.
Undo. Okay, so that is really, right now we haven't really even talked much about hell itself. We're just talking about death and Hades. The idea that after this life we're waiting for something. There's a waiting place for us, so even for the good and the bad, there's a place after this life that we wait, and we wait for judgment. And it says there in that last verse that the dead were judged by what was written in the books. So we're waiting, in essence, for the day of judgment, and that is what Hades is. Now, going into the discussion of hell, the Greek word that is translated hell, typically, there's basically like 13 or 14. I'd say about 13 different places that we typically translate hell. There's one in the older NIV that is not typically in most places, that has to do with Lazarus and the rich man and Lazarus, where it's actually Hades. So it's talking about Hades, but the NIV, the 1984 NIV, has it as hell. But the literal is Hades. There's about 13 different places where it references Hades, and the word that's used for Hades, not Hades, what am I saying? For hell is Gehenna.
Yeah, I forgot that one.
And Gehenna is actually a transliteration of the Hebrew valley called Ben Hinnom, the valley of Ben Hinnom, which is a valley south of Jerusalem where Molech was sacrificed to, where they would do the child sacrifices to Molech. So when they say Gehenna, they're kind of referencing the imagery of the burning of the sacrifices to Molech. So that's what. So when they say, what we translate as hell is a visual image for the Jews, especially, to this valley of apostasy, this valley of evil, this valley where they burn their children. So I don't know if I can spell Gehenna, but I'm going to try. Gehenna.
That looks like it, yeah.
And of course, depends on who you're. I've seen it spelled differently, actually, but So that's referenced different places in 2 Kings, Jeremiah, 2 Chronicles, and so this is a place, and it's a kind of a transliteration from the Hebrew into Greek. So let's look at one place specifically, and then I don't remember what else I have, but Matthew chapter 5, verse 22 says, "But I say to you, everyone who is angry at his brother," this is a passage I think we're familiar with, everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council. But whoever says to you, you fool, is liable to hell of fire. And so we've already talked about a lake of fire, and Gehenna is, so it's almost like saying Gehenna, the valley of fire. So in essence, anyone who goes as far as to say you fool is liable to the hell of fire, this vile, detestable place that you will be burned in, like they did.
That's where Matthew 5 what?
22.
Okay. I'm a little farther down than that. I just did a search for hell, and 5:29 and 30 popped up too. Mm-hmm. Where if your right eye or your right hand
Mm-hmm.
cause you to sin, you will be thrown in, your whole body will go into hell.
Yeah, it's better to pluck out your eye than to be thrown into hell.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the, those passages are repeated, I think 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
So out of the 13 times, 6, I don't remember if it's 3, but anyway, there's 6 to 9 times that those there's 3 passages that say that specific thing. It's better for you to cut off your arm, better for you to cut off your whatever, pluck out your eye,
Mm-hmm.
than to go into the hell of fire, essentially. And it's kind of interesting, the imagery that's used for this, though. I mean, in a sense, like the very idea that he uses Gehenna as a reference for what hell is, about what you're destined for if you're going to live like this. You're essentially going to be, I guess, like God's child being burnt up. Because he created you, you're his child, and the only reason that this even makes sense is because you're detestable to God. And it's horrible imagery. It's terrifying, and it should be something that causes us to consider ourselves and our actions and our lives and our words and whatnot. Any other thoughts on Gehenna and that? So I wanted to connect these two. So we talked about the lake of fire. In Revelations, that Hades and death is thrown into, and Gehenna is a valley of fire. So in a sense, what we're talking about, Gehenna is this lake of fire, and Gehenna is hell. Okay, the hell of fire, it is the place of destruction, the second death, the fire that ends all things. So I make that connection anyway. It seems to come together. Let's look at Matthew chapter 10, and I think Matthew is probably references this word, uses this word more than anyone else. So have no fear of them. This is Matthew 10:26 through 28. So have no fear of them. Those who are persecuting you and doing all sorts of things against you because of me. Have no fear of them, for nothing is covered that will not be revealed, or hidden that will not be known. What I tell you in the dark, say in the light, and what you hear whispered, proclaim on the housetops. Do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul, but rather fear him who can destroy both soul and body in hell. With what we've talked about, what is that? What is this? How does this? What does this make you think of, or how does the fact that? Well, who is it? Let me ask this question: who is it that can kill both body and soul?
Jesus.
Jesus and God. They have power to destroy both our soul and our body. And let's say we talked about that. I mean, there's basically two deaths that we face. We face a physical death and a spiritual death. And if we choose to die spiritually, then the second death is all that awaits us. And we've died to ourselves, and so that's the spiritual death. So there's a second one that awaits. But we are to fear the one who can destroy both the body and the soul. And any thoughts on that?
Well, we think of, I do anyway, when you think of a fire, you think of total destruction. You know, it leaves nothing but ashes, and
Right.
ashes are nothing. They're just, you know, they'll blow away in the wind. They're so small and used up. So you don't want to wind up in the lake of fire. Because you won't even leave any ashes.
Yeah.
It's gone.
Well, you know, and it's amazing that fire can destroy anything. Over a period of time, fire, if it's hot enough to affect the object that it's interacting with, it will destroy everything.
Exactly.
From metal to rocks,
bricks,
anything.
rock, yeah.
I mean, you use
up.
metal to change the substance of something into something else. You use metal to purify. I mean, not metal. You use fire to purify things, so that you can separate impurities. And so fire is powerful. I mean, nothing's more powerful. The only thing more powerful than fire, in a sense, is water. Water is the only thing more powerful than fire.
Extinguish it.
It extinguishes the fire and it puts it out. But then again, fire can still, if it's hot enough, it'll just make it vaporize. But the point is that the fire is destructive, utterly destructive. There's nothing left after it's done with it. And that's what we're talking. I mean, that's what we're talking about. I don't know that I probably should have done some research into like the kind of like how they did sacrifices of the children, because it's not a normal sacrifice. If you're sacrificing to God, you're sacrificing something, and you may be burning up some of it, but there's a lot of food left, and you eat it. That's not what's happening with Moloch. I hope. I don't know, but you're talking about consuming something rather than just a fire that kills. It's not just going to melt the skin, but this is going to be destructive. Let's go to 2 Thessalonians and kind of end it, and then I have a couple more questions I want to ask. 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, verse 5 through 9.
2 Thessalonians 1.
1. 5 through 9, if somebody will read that.
All this is evidence that God's judgment is right, and as a result you will be counted worthy of the kingdom of God, for which you are suffering. God is just. He will pay back trouble to those who trouble you, and give relief to you who are troubled, and to us as well. This will happen when the Lord Jesus is revealed from heaven in blazing fire with his powerful angels. He will punish those who do not know God and do not obey the gospel of our Lord Jesus. they will be punished with everlasting destruction and shut out from the presence of the Lord and from the glory of his might.
So what is what is the punishment and vengeance that's spoken of?
Eternal destruction.
Eternal destruction. And then we've just talked about that. That's eternal destruction. And I've sometimes, and this is one of the things I've been thinking about. My father-in-law said this at one point, and I wasn't sure I believed him. A year or so before he died, he was talking about this, that the idea that really, I mean, there's a lot more to discuss. I mean, there's many more passages we can talk about that talk about hell but don't use the word hell. When we talk about the weeping and gnashing of teeth and being cast out, and you get the idea of torment, but we also get the idea of utter destruction as well. And I'm not sure if either one of those is more important than the other. But the idea is you don't want that. All right? I mean, if you're utterly destroyed, this isn't a halfway. This isn't a second death waiting for the third death. You don't get it. There's no turning back here. This is utter destruction. And in a sense, if you destroy something for eternity, I mean, eternity is now forever. But if you're destroyed now, there is no more now for you. I mean, it's over. It is, and so I don't know if, I mean, there's, like I said, there's other places we have talk about the torture and the torment of Lazarus and the rich man. But I think the most important thing that we draw from all of this is that this is not what we want, and it's we don't want to be motivated by hell alone, right? We don't want to be motivated by fear alone, but fear is a good kick in the pants to remind you what you really want.
Well, the second half of verse 9 says it all. Away from the presence of the Lord and from the glory of his might. And you certainly don't want to be away from the presence of the Lord.
Well, and what is, Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And if you are away from the life, you have no life.
Right.
And in a sense, it doesn't matter whether you continue in torture or if you're destroyed, you have no life. There's nothing left. It is an end, in essence, an end of life. And that should be a stark image for us. That reminds us. I don't want to be going on the path that I'm on, because so many times we turn that direction and we don't realize it, and our path takes us back towards hell. We see that, we use that as a kick in the pants to turn back and repent, so that we can focus our goal, our hearts and our minds on the glory of heaven, the life that is eternal, rather than the life that is ending.
So instead of eternal punishment, hell is just eternal destruction. You just go away.
It could be, but I don't know. And again, like I said, I don't know that for us does that really matter.
No, because if you're away from the presence
If you're
of the
away
Lord,
from the presence of the Lord, it's going to be. I mean, if you remain, it'll be torment. If you die, it'll be the end. One way or the other. I don't want to find out. I don't want to know anything about what's happening on the other side of that divide. I want to be with Abraham, with Noah, with Joseph. I want to be with Jacob and Isaac and
Jesus.
And Jesus. Praise God. I don't want to know what's on the other side of that. And it's not so important that we know exactly what it is, but we know that we don't want that. What we know is that there is something that awaits those who do not follow God and do not do His will, that is not an imaginary thing. It's not something that, but the reality is that there's something that awaits, whether it is a place of eternal torment or whether it is an end for eternity. We don't want either, and it doesn't really matter which one it is. What matters is that's not where we want to go. We want to go to Abraham's bosom, to heaven, to the glory of God.
Wow. That's,
Yeah, that's pretty powerful.
that's a lot to think about.
Yeah.
My goodness.
Yeah,
So conceivably, your torment could only be while you're waiting.
yeah.
But then when the judgment is made, then you suffer eternal destruction.
It's like when you're waiting for Daddy to come home, but it's worse.
You're right. Right.
You know that Daddy's coming home. He knows what you've done, and you know what you're getting, and you have to wait for it. But it's worse than even that.
Yeah, it's being thrown out to never be in His presence again.
Yeah.
Wow.
And we should stress to the people that we're telling about Jesus is that if they're not in Him, they're going to burn forever. I mean, you remember that? They're going to be, which like James said, we don't have to worry about that because we're in Christ, but the ones who are not, what does that mean? They're going to be in there burning and they're not being burned up like the bush. They're just going to be heat, and can you imagine that?
Wow.
So I think we should stress that to the people that we're, having lessons with, express that to them. Yeah.
Well,
Fear's a good motivator.
Yeah, it is. And that's the truth. It's a fact.
and it's not, but once we get motivated by that fear, and when you think about it, one of the things that at one point Jesus says, don't fear the one who can only hurt your body, but fear the one who can hurt your body and your soul. Who does God tell you to fear? God always tells you to fear one person, and it's Him. Because if you trust in God, the only thing you have to fear is Him and His judgment. If you trust in Him and you fear Him, in the end, you don't even have to fear Him because you do fear Him. You don't have anything to be afraid of because you know who He is, what He can do.
Yeah.